The manager snapped, "Your withdrawals denied," shaming Eleanor Harris as a client, sneered, unaware that in 7 minutes she'd fire the manager as Horizon Bank's CEO. Before we reveal Eleanor's triumph, where are you watching from? If her stand for fairness speaks to you, share your story at your local branch. One voice rising invites others. Stay tuned. What happens next proves dignity must never be denied. The bank lobby was quiet, save for the low hum of murmurs and the occasional buzz of impatient fingers tapping on phone screens. Fluorescent lights flickered softly above as Eleanor Harris, a 67-year-old black woman dressed in a dark teal cashmere coat and low-heeled boots, stood before the teller's counter with calm assurance. Her voice was polite but firm. "I'd like to withdraw $50,000, please." She placed her ID and bank card on the counter. The teller behind the glass Tara leads didn't reach for them. Instead, she looked over Eleanor's shoulder toward the branch manager, Margaret Klein, who was walking briskly from her office in heels that clicked across the polished floor. Margaret barely glanced at the ID before dismissively pushing it back across the counter with 2 fingers. "This account doesn't match your profile. Step aside, please." Her tone was clipped, not questioning, concluding. A tall white man in a pinstripe suit standing nearby, Preston Ward, a frequent and valued VIP client, chuckled under his breath. "She's not one of us," he muttered loud enough for a few heads to turn. Behind them, an elderly couple sighed about the broken ATM, casting irritated glances at Eleanor as if she were the source of the delay. But Eleanor didn't blink. "There's been a mistake, and you'll want to correct it," she said with quiet confidence, her fingers resting on her purse. Margaret leaned in slightly, squinting at the screen. "You're not authorized for this amount?" she said louder this time, drawing attention from a small group of customers near the loan desk. Tara chimed in quickly, her eyes on the screen. "Her account's been flagged." Then she leaned sideways and whispered to another teller, "Possible fraud alert, probably trying to slip something through." Eleanor caught the word and took a small breath through her nose. "Is there a reason you're making assumptions out loud?" she asked. Tara, without looking up, replied, "Ma'am, please step aside while we verify you." A man in a green windbreaker groaned. "She's holding up the line," and another shook his head as if inconvenience justified prejudice. Eleanor clutched her purse tighter, not in fear, but in resolve. "You'll answer for this," she said softly. "Not a threat, just a truth." Preston Ward, now emboldened by Margaret's presence and Tara's whispering, raised his voice just enough to slice through the tension. "High-value clients don't look like her," he said to no one in particular. A few uncomfortable glances rippled through the crowd. Tara nodded as she updated Eleanor's file on screen and printed a receipt marked with the word suspicious. She handed it to Eleanor with a clipped, fake smile. "We're verifying you. Please be patient." Eleanor took the paper without looking at it. "You've made yourself quite clear," she said. Her voice had not risen once, but the room seemed to feel a shift. One by one, people began to sense there was more to this moment than they first assumed. What none of them knew was that the woman they were marginalizing wasn't just another account holder. Eleanor Harris had built Horizon Bank's expansion strategy over the past decade, rising through scrutiny and resistance to become the institution's first black female CEO. When board members doubted her cultural fit, she rewrote the training manual. When regulators questioned her leadership during the 2008 crisis, she steadied the institution and steered it toward community investment. But today, in her own Chicago branch, the one she personally approved for renovation last spring, she was being told she didn't belong. Not everyone ignored the shift. Lydia Grant, a junior teller in her late 60s with silver braids pulled back, neatly watched the exchange with increasing discomfort. She knew Eleanor not well, but enough to recognize the woman standing under the lobby chandelier wasn't someone to be dismissed. She discreetly stepped away from her desk and made her way toward the back hallway. At the security desk near the exit, Marcus Tate, a retired police captain now serving as Horizon's head of security, had also taken notice. He watched as Tara leaned toward Preston and exchanged words again. His eyes narrowed. He turned to check the cameras and flagged the footage. Near the break room, Clara Evans, a senior board member who had been on a remote call, took off her Bluetooth headset and turned toward the lobby with her phone still recording audio. Her lips tightened. At another branch, Nina Patel, the director of human resources, was sorting internal training logs when she received an alert on her tablet, a notification that Margaret Klein had just submitted a suspicious activity report on the CEO's own account. Nina froze, then started typing. Back in the lobby, Eleanor remained still. She wasn't here to announce who she was. She wasn't here to lecture or raise her voice. She was here to withdraw her own money. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and tapped a contact on her phone. "Raymond," she said quietly, "I need you to review Margaret Klein's record. Now." Raymond Holt, chairman of Horizon Bank and longtime confidant, was in a conference room 2 floors above, but his voice came through clear. "Already heard what's happening. Clara called me. Margaret's had 3 bias complaints in the past 18 months. You want a summary?" Eleanor nodded slightly. "Send it to HR and legal. I'll take it from here." At that moment, Lydia reappeared by her side, quietly slipping Eleanor a printed copy of Margaret's employee conduct log. The papers were marked "Final Warning, Review Pending." Eleanor took the document with a small nod. Around them, customers had begun to sense that something was off, no longer just a delay, but a moment worth witnessing. A few lifted their phones. Eleanor turned toward Margaret, still standing stiffly by the teller window. "Your time's running out," she said plainly. Margaret blinked, caught between confusion and the first flicker of fear. Behind her, Tara whispered something to Kenneth Doyle, the operations supervisor, who had just stepped into view from the hallway. Kenneth frowned but said nothing. Eleanor didn't move. She didn't need to. Her presence had already begun to unsettle the room. This lobby standoff was set to test Eleanor's authority not with shouting or demands, but with precision, patience, and the quiet weight of truth. Margaret had just made the worst mistake of her career, and in 7 minutes, the reckoning would begin. Margaret Klein reached for the phone on the service desk, her voice cutting through the growing unease like a blade. "We have a fraud issue in progress," she announced, turning deliberately so that every customer in the lobby could hear her. The tension already simmering flared. Gasps and glances spread like wildfire. Tara Leeds leaned toward Preston Ward and whispered, "She's trying to scam us. Probably got someone else's card." Preston scoffed loudly and declared, "Horizon protects real clients." He straightened his blazer, turned toward the small crowd behind them, and added with manufactured gravity, "We can't just let anyone walk in and take what they want." Lydia Grant, still at her station, narrowed her eyes. "Show the fraud proof," she said sharply. Tara turned, her expression twisting. "Stay out of this, Lydia," she hissed. At that moment, a woman near the exit called out, "What's going on?" Another customer muttered, "Why hasn't security removed her yet?" The murmur spread like a cold wind through the lobby. Eleanor remained motionless. "Your lies," she said to Margaret, her voice steady and low, "are reckless and will cost you more than your job." Without warning, Tara reached for her keyboard and began clicking rapidly. "Her account's frozen," she said, not looking up. "She's not getting a dime." She smiled tight and cruel, as if she'd just proven her own suspicion. Kenneth Doyle, the branch's operations supervisor, now hovering near Margaret's shoulder, leaned down and whispered something. Margaret nodded, and Kenneth stepped forward. "Transaction voided," he announced. "This account is under review. Please escort the individual out." His voice lacked even the courtesy of eye contact. Someone from the back of the line groaned. "She's clearly an imposter." A man in a baseball cap near the entrance muttered, "Don't you need ID to take out that kind of money? Something's fishy." Eleanor turned her head slightly. "You're all accountable?" She said not loudly, but clearly enough for every word to land. "This isn't just a mistake anymore. This is misconduct." Preston's tone shifted from smug to sharp. "This is unacceptable," he boomed. "Horizon's for elite clients, not people who stroll in off the street asking for thousands in cash." Margaret nodded at Tara, who printed a second slip marked "Denied" in bold red text. She pushed it toward Eleanor and said, "This is our final action. Leave now." Eleanor didn't move. Instead, she reached into her pocket and calmly took out her phone again. This, she said as she held it up, is recorded. The lobby fell momentarily silent. Cameras were already rolling, some hidden behind shaking hands, others openly capturing the scene as it unfolded. The air grew thick with discomfort. This wasn't the first time Tara had spoken out of turn. Years earlier, when Eleanor was still the executive VP of strategy, she remembered reviewing a compliance case where Tara had been verbally inappropriate to an elderly Latino client. The report had been buried. Margaret had written the summary and called it miscommunication. Today, that same disdain echoed through the lobby, sharpened by the same kind of assumption Eleanor had fought to erase from Horizon's culture. Near the far wall, Marcus Tate quietly adjusted the volume on the lobby's hidden microphone stream and began typing. He had already noted Kenneth's earlier words, "She's too old for this account," and flagged them as potential age-based discrimination. But now Marcus heard something worse. Kenneth leaned in again and muttered to Margaret, "Older black clients trigger more red flags. That's just how the metrics look." Marcus's hand froze over his keyboard. A slow breath left his lips. He flagged the audio, copied it, and sent it straight to Clara Evans. At the same time, Lydia looked up from her drawer and met Marcus's eyes. Without speaking, he nodded slightly. They both knew what they'd heard and what it meant. Clara's voice crackled from Eleanor's speaker. "That violates both internal policy and federal protections. Keep going. You're not alone." Around the room, customers began shifting, not just physically, but emotionally. Something about Eleanor's composure, her refusal to back down, was starting to stir discomfort in those who'd once been content to assume. Then came the twist that shifted the entire room. Marcus stepped forward with a folded paper and handed it to Eleanor discreetly. She unfolded it slowly. It was a printout of a falsified fraud report. At the top, her account number. Beneath it, Tara's signature time-stamped 10 minutes earlier. The language on the form claimed third-party impersonation suspected. Eleanor read it silently, then passed it to Lydia. "It's fabricated," Lydia said immediately. "There's no basis for this. She has full ID, facial match, signature match." "I checked everything." Tara, now visibly uncomfortable, snapped, "You weren't authorized to check anything," but Lydia didn't flinch. "You're not authorized to invent threats," she said calmly. Eleanor tapped her phone again. "Nina," she said, "I need Tara's full transaction history pulled now. Anything she's flagged in the last 3 months." On the other end, Nina Patel replied instantly, "Already compiling it. There's a pattern." Eleanor looked around the room now, thick with tension. "You think you're doing this to a stranger?" she said, turning her gaze from Margaret to Tara, and then to Kenneth. "But everything you've done here is systemic. It's how you treat people you believe can't fight back." At the mention of that word systemic, Clara's voice piped up again through the speakerphone. "Eleanor, this is Clara. We've looped in Raymond and legal. If you want to act now, we're backing you." A wave of murmurs passed through the lobby. A man near the brochures whispered, "Wait, she knows the board." Another customer, who had earlier rolled her eyes, now crossed her arms and frowned, not at Eleanor, but at the staff. The mood was changing. Margaret, trying to seize control, waved her hand dismissively. "This is irrelevant. She doesn't even have a proper client record in our branch," Kenneth echoed. "It's internal. Let legal sort it out." But Eleanor stepped closer to the front of the counter and held up the falsified document again. "Let me be clear," she said. "This isn't just a mistake. It's deception. You wrote a lie, filed it into an official record, and tried to freeze a valid account. That's fraud." Her voice was calm, but each word landed like a gavel. A woman near the mortgage station whispered to her partner, She's going to sue them. Preston opened his mouth to object, but for once the words didn't come. The entire lobby was now divided, those who still clung to old assumptions, and those who had begun to see that this woman was not only right, but someone powerful. Still, not one of the staff had asked who she was. They assumed, because of her skin, her age, her dignity, that she didn't belong. But that illusion was breaking, and break it would soon, and publicly. Kenneth Doyle stepped forward, chest puffed, his voice rising with false certainty. "Security!" he called out, gesturing sharply to Marcus Tate. "Escort this woman off the premises. She's a fraud, and she's disturbing our clients." Preston Ward took that as his cue. With a sneer, he shoved past a pair of confused customers and positioned himself next to Kenneth, his voice oozing disdain. "I've been coming to Horizon for 30 years, and I've never seen such disorder. This bank isn't for her kind." His eyes lingered on Eleanor's coat, her posture, her skin, every part of her presence that defied his narrow view of belonging. "She doesn't fit here," he added louder this time. A few gasps fluttered through the lobby. Tara Leeds, emboldened, tapped a few keys and said smugly, "Account locked. She's done." The monitor behind her flashed red across the screen. A teenager near the coffee station raised his phone and began recording. Another woman whispered, "Is that even legal?" Eleanor stood unmoving. Her voice remained calm. "What you've just done is career-ending," she said, "and it's all on record." Tara laughed. "You're not who you think you are." The space was no longer just a lobby, it had become a stage, and the audience was watching closely. Then came insult number 8. Margaret, red-faced and desperate, pointed her finger directly at Eleanor. "You have no business here," she snapped. "You're nobody in this building. I will call the police if you don't leave right now." Preston folded his arms and nodded as if affirming her declaration. "Elite banking doesn't tolerate disruption," he chimed in, clearly savoring every word. Tara, still glued to her monitor, messaged the internal group chat, "Client banned." "Watch her." A man in a gray suit near the deposit slips muttered, "Maybe she's casing the place." Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "Every action you take now is being documented and reported." Marcus remained near the lobby entrance, watching. He hadn't moved to follow Kenneth's command, and now his refusal drew attention. Customers noticed. Phones were up. The murmurs were louder now. Something had shifted. This wasn't just about a mistaken withdrawal. This was about resistance, something Eleanor had lived her entire career confronting. She remembered the time she was told a black woman won't close that acquisition and how she delivered it ahead of schedule. She remembered when they doubted she could navigate federal compliance reform. Then she rewrote Horizon's entire audit framework. Her history had been one of quiet defiance turned to public achievement. Today, that same doubt echoed in Kenneth's commands, in Preston's sneer, in Margaret's threat. But it would not win. She raised her hand slightly, and Marcus moved toward her. "I need Nina's report," Eleanor said, voice calm. "Now." Marcus reached into his coat pocket and handed her a file. She turned, holding the folder in view of the growing crowd. "This," she said, "is truth." A flash from the lobby's ceiling-mounted monitor signaled that Lydia had accessed the internal presentation system. The display behind the counter flickered, then loaded a live HR report titled "Bias Training Compliance Chicago Branch." Names appeared. Margaret Klein's was near the top, marked in red. Mandatory training, missed 4 out of 4 sessions. Tara's name followed. Completed 1 out of 4. Flagged attitude violation noted by instructor. Kenneth's record completed 2 of 4. Comment dismissive. Lacked engagement. Customers leaned in. A woman near the front pointed. "Wait. They never even finished training." The teenager filming whispered, "This is wild." A local reporter who had entered earlier to cover a small business segment was now fully alert, notepad out, phone up. He whispered into his mic, "Bias incident unfolding at Horizon Bank Live." Margaret stepped back as if physically struck. "You can't display that here," she stammered. "That's internal." Eleanor turned slowly to face her. Not anymore. You made this public when you denied me access to my own funds. You made this public when you submitted a fraudulent report. And now the public deserves the truth. The monitor shifted screens again this time, showing a clip from Horizon's internal staff meeting 3 months prior. Nina Patel's voice came through the speakers. All employees are expected to complete the updated bias certification modules. Failure to do so will be noted and reviewed during performance assessments. The words hung heavy in the air. Clara Evans's voice chimed in via speakerphone. We warned you, Margaret. These aren't just suggestions. They're policy. Margaret's face drained of color. Kenneth looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Tara folded her arms, but her fingers trembled slightly. Eleanor looked at the growing crowd. This is the moment many people dread, the moment you're called out. But I'm not here for vengeance. I'm here for accountability. She handed the file to Marcus, who walked it over to the desk and placed it firmly in front of Margaret. The reporter moved closer. Ma'am, he said gently, would you mind confirming your role for the record? Eleanor looked at him, then past him at the people watching, the ones who came in for deposits, to open accounts, to ask for loans, but who now stood frozen, bearing witness. Not yet, she said, her voice even. The lesson's not over. Margaret hissed under her breath. You're humiliating us. Eleanor answered, You've humiliated yourselves. Then she turned to the monitor and typed in a code. The system logged in instantly, CEO access granted. Audible gasps followed. Preston looked like he'd swallowed a stone. Tara stepped back. Kenneth's shoulders slumped. The truth wasn't coming. It was already here. On the screen, employee compliance data scrolled. Notes, warnings, reviews. And at the top of the screen, her own name, Eleanor Harris, Chief Executive Officer, active. She turned to Marcus. Get Clara on the board call. He nodded and stepped away to dial. The final act of this standoff wasn't rage or retaliation. It was control exercised with precision, not fury. The crowd now stood still, some in awe, others in shame. Phones remained high, but so did respect. Eleanor hadn't needed to raise her voice. The truth had spoken for her. And now the reckoning would be public. The lesson indeed wasn't over. 15 floors above the chaos unfolding in the Chicago branch lobby, the polished boardroom of Horizon Bank echoed with the sound of unease. Raymond Holt, the 69-year-old chairman, stood with both hands braced against the glass wall, watching as Clara Evans paced a tight circle across the thick carpet. I don't care how embarrassing this is, Clara said sharply. Your manager denied a withdrawal to the CEO of this bank and filed a fraudulent report. She slammed her tablet down the screen, glowing with the live footage being streamed from a customer's phone. It's gone viral, 4,000 views in under 10 minutes. Local reporters are already tagging us. Raymond turned, rubbing his temples. How the hell did this happen in a branch we cleared last quarter? Margaret Klein was on a final warning. Clara didn't blink. And Kenneth Doyle has been quietly covering for her. The HR logs are damning. Tara leads, same pattern. And now we've got Preston Ward grandstanding about who qualifies as elite in front of our actual clients. Raymond moved to the head of the table, pulled out his phone, and began scrolling through Eleanor's message thread. Every text was calm, methodical, complete with time-stamped documents. She warned me, he said more to himself than to Clara. She said the culture was cracking beneath us. Below them, Eleanor stood in front of the teller counter, her body still, her voice absent for now. Around her, the lobby buzzed with shifting emotions. Some customers, newly aware, had begun to leave, murmuring about switching banks. Others stayed glued to the unfolding spectacle. Marcus stood to her left, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the staff. Tara had stopped speaking. Kenneth had backed into a corner, arms crossed, defensively. Margaret still hadn't sat down. She looked less like a manager and more like someone waiting for judgment. Lydia passed Eleanor a silent thumbs up. Clara had looped her into the board's response thread. The machine was moving now. Eleanor didn't need to push it. She just needed to steer. In the boardroom, Raymond placed a call on speaker. "I want legal HR compliance and Clara on this call right now," he barked. "No delay." One by one, tiles populated the screen of the conference room monitor. Nina Patel appeared first. Already reviewed the footage and reports, she said, her tone tight but steady. Margaret submitted 4 red-flagged incident reports in 12 months each with racially coded language. Kenneth signed off on all of them without escalation. Clara added, "Tara has been flagged 3 times by customer service complaints for tone and improper denial of services to non-white clients. Preston Ward's statements today could be grounds for branch privileges termination. He is not staff, but his behavior violates our public client code." Raymond didn't speak. He only nodded and gestured for the floor. Kenneth's voice broke in, patching in remotely from the branch hallway. "With respect, I think Eleanor may be overreacting. This situation is highly charged, perhaps misinterpreted." Tara's voice jumped in. "She's confused. She never identified herself as the CEO. We were acting on safety protocol." Clara cut in like a blade. "You created the protocol she was forced to respond to. You fabricated the threat." Nina added, "We have documentation, screen recordings, internal messages, audio logs, and 3 employee testimonies confirming that Eleanor was calm, compliant, and fully verified. You escalated a routine withdrawal into a public disgrace." Raymond, still calm but stony, said, "Margaret, are you on the line?" Her voice cracked through. "I didn't know who she was. She wasn't acting like an executive. She didn't demand priority." Eleanor, still in the lobby, heard this through the speakerphone. She turned to Marcus and nodded once. He tapped a button on the desk phone and patched her in. Her voice now rang out through the boardroom like a blade through silk. "Raymond," she said, "do I have the board's attention?" Silence. Then Clara. "You have it," Eleanor continued. "I am invoking Section 7 of our Executive Crisis Protocol. That allows me, in consultation with at least 1 board member and 1 HR officer, to remove a branch-level executive on grounds of misconduct, racial discrimination, and breach of fiduciary trust. I have Clara. I have Nina. I have the logs. I have the footage. Unless there is objection, I will proceed." Raymond closed his eyes briefly. "No objection," he said. Clara followed none. "Nina, I support." Eleanor turned, slightly facing Margaret directly. "Your employment at Horizon Bank is terminated effective immediately pending legal review." Margaret's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Customers audibly gasped. One woman clapped. Another simply said, "Finally." Kenneth stepped forward, voice trembling. "You're overstepping. You're too close to this." Eleanor didn't look at him. "You're suspended, Kenneth. Pending mandatory retraining. Final decision to follow internal review. Tara as well." Tara dropped her phone. "Wait, what?" Eleanor stepped forward. "You filed a false fraud report. You created a narrative to justify bias. We have your logs. We have the transcript. You're lucky we're not pressing charges." Tara looked to Margaret, but Margaret had already turned her back. Raymond's voice came over the speaker again. "Preston Ward's privileges at Horizon are revoked effective today. We will not tolerate discrimination from clients either." Preston, red with fury, stormed toward the exit. "You'll hear from my attorney." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Let him call," she said. "We'll forward him the footage." Preston's shoulder hit the door harder than necessary. Nobody held it open. The reporter stood now, phone still recording. "Miss Harris," he said softly, "can you confirm your role for the record?" Eleanor looked around the lobby. "My name is Eleanor Harris. I am Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Bank. What happened today was not an exception, it was a symptom. And it ends here." She stepped away from the teller desk and faced the people still watching. "Not one of you needed to know my title to treat me with dignity. That's the culture I've been fighting to build. And now it will be enforced." Outside the glass walls of the branch, the winter wind had picked up. Inside, the storm had passed, but only for now. Change would not wait, and neither would Eleanor. Eleanor Harris stood with measured calm in the center of the Horizon Bank lobby, her voice the only thing still in motion. Margaret Klein is hereby terminated. Kenneth Doyle and Tara Leeds are suspended for mandatory retraining. Preston Ward's privileges are revoked permanently. These actions are effective immediately. Silence stretched across the tile floor like a spill of cold water. Margaret took a small, instinctive step backward, her mouth parting but offering no protest. Kenneth's expression wavered between disbelief and rising shame, while Tara clenched her jaw, blinking rapidly, still grasping for footing. Preston had already stormed out, but his echo still lingered in the air like stale perfume. A few customers gasped. One older man whispered to his wife, "She's firing them right here." The couple stayed unmoving, caught between disbelief and awe. At the teller line, Lydia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Marcus didn't move. His arms remained folded, his stance square beside Eleanor. He had known from the beginning who she was, what she was. But now the entire room knew. And still not everyone grasped it. Kenneth straightened his blazer and finally found his voice. "You don't have the authority to make these decisions, ma'am. This is above your clearance level." Tara chimed in, her voice tighter, more panicked. "She's not even verified in our branch system. This has to go through regional." Eleanor turned toward them slowly, the weight of years behind her every step. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached into her purse, withdrew a slim leather case, and opened it to reveal a Horizon Gold ID badge, one only issued to the top 3 officers in the bank's leadership. The seal gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights. Below the logo, Eleanor M. Harris, Chief Executive Officer. Her voice was steady, but her tone changed firmer, now commanding. "I founded Horizon's Internal Ethics Division 20 years ago. I restructured our compliance systems during the 2008 crisis. I personally wrote the diversity reform charter you never bothered to read." She looked at Margaret. "I'm not some woman who walked in from the street. I built this place. From nothing." The crowd, stunned into silence, shifted. Some whispered. Others pulled phones back up. Someone whispered, "She's the CEO." Clara's voice cut through again from the speakerphone at the desk. "Confirmed. CEO Harris is acting under full board authority. All decisions are binding and legally protected under the Crisis Intervention Charter. Nina Patel, followed HR, is executing documentation now. All staff involved are suspended from system access as of this moment." Kenneth's hands twitched. "I didn't know," he mumbled. Eleanor faced him. "That's exactly the problem." But she wasn't done. From behind her, Marcus handed over a tablet displaying the bank's compliance dashboard. She tapped the screen, and the monitor above the teller line changed again this time, showing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's internal warning letter sent to Horizon Bank's legal office 6 weeks earlier. The letter cited repeated failure to enforce anti-discrimination measures, poor disciplinary follow-through, and gaps in executive training. The warning concluded with a direct line. "Non-compliance may result in a federal investigation and financial penalty exceeding $10 million if unresolved." The words now glowed across the lobby screen in bright red. Customers gasped. One man took a step toward the exit, then stopped, frozen between fear and fascination. Margaret blinked as if seeing it for the first time. "No one ever shared that with me," she whispered. Eleanor didn't flinch. "It was in your inbox. Nina's team sent it with a request for acknowledgement. You ignored it." Clara added, "We have the read receipt." Margaret swayed slightly. The confidence had drained from her posture, replaced by something closer to fragile regret. But Eleanor didn't lean into cruelty. She kept her stance level. "You have a choice," she said. "You can resign with a written acknowledgement of misconduct and pending review be considered for training placement at one of our partner nonprofits. Or you can leave now and be named in the compliance report submitted to the CFPB. Choose wisely." Margaret swallowed hard. "You'd give me a chance to do it right." Her voice was hoarse. Eleanor paused just long enough to make the answer matter. I believe in second chances, she said, but only when they're earned. Tara, stunned, looked between them. And us. Eleanor turned. You're suspended, but I've assigned Nina to design a reform track. If you complete it with sincerity and proof of progress, you may be eligible for reassignment. Kenneth looked away, jaw tight. Tara nodded, once eyes damp. Thank you, she said quietly. We don't deserve it. Eleanor didn't answer. That was the point. In the background, the young reporter stepped forward, microphone now extended with open curiosity. Ms. Harris, he said softly, was this always your plan to confront them like this in person? Eleanor gave a small shake of her head. No, she replied. I came to withdraw $50,000. That was all. But when a moment reveals rot, you don't step back. You remove it. She turned to face the lobby, no longer an audience, but a witness group changed by what they'd seen. This was never about a withdrawal. It was about what's been withdrawn from people like me for too long: dignity, trust, fair treatment. Her eyes scanned the room. Not anymore. Raymond Holt's voice returned to the speaker briefly. Ms. Harris, thank you. I've notified federal compliance of the disciplinary action and requested a hold on audit proceedings pending documentation of reform rollout. Eleanor nodded. Good, because next time we won't be asking for grace. She turned and walked slowly across the lobby toward the front glass doors. People parted to let her through, not out of fear, but out of respect. As she passed, one older woman reached out and gently touched Eleanor's arm. Thank you, she whispered. Eleanor stopped just briefly. Thank you for staying, she said. The door opened with a soft chime. And just like that, she was gone, leaving behind a storm that had cleared the air and the beginning of something long overdue. 3 weeks later, Horizon Bank's Chicago branch looked nothing like the place where it all began. Gone were the whispered judgments behind the counter, the stares that sliced the silence that smothered truth. In their place stood a new rhythm measured, clear, accountable. At its center was a program that Eleanor Harris named herself Fairbank. Its motto was printed on every terminal screen, etched into new glass signs, and repeated in every onboarding meeting across all branches. Dignity is not optional. Under the Fairbank initiative, Eleanor mandated full-spectrum bias training, not just the hollow slide decks of years past, but live seminars led by community advocates, cultural historians, and behavioral experts. Every employee from teller to vice president was required to complete certification in active bias interruption, client equity rights, and voice-based respect protocols. The compliance system, once hidden in internal folders, was now public-facing. A digital ticker in every branch displayed real-time training completion rates and open accountability forms. The air had changed, not just in policy, but in spirit. Nina Patel oversaw the program's rollout with unmatched precision. Lydia Grant, newly promoted to Regional Equity Officer, traveled to multiple branches, sharing what she witnessed that day in the lobby and how it changed her. Kenneth Doyle returned quietly after his suspension, eyes lowered, tone softer. He never tried to justify his past behavior. Instead, he spent his mornings reviewing customer logs, identifying patterns he once ignored. Tara Leeds, now on a 6-month reform track, sat through every training session with notes in hand. It wasn't easy. Staff noticed. But so did Eleanor. One afternoon, she passed Tara in the corridor and simply said, "Keep going." Tara nodded without a word. Some redemption comes slowly. Eleanor knew that. She also knew what couldn't be forgiven without transformation. Margaret Klein never returned, but her file, now sealed in HR archives, was used as a training case across the bank, not to humiliate, but to teach. Eleanor had made one thing clear: Horizon's reform wasn't about revenge, it was about prevention. The public response was staggering. Clients who had quietly watched the lobby incident unfold, some in person, others online, began writing letters to corporate thanking Eleanor for standing her ground. New accounts surged. Elderly clients, veterans, immigrants, and single mothers all reported they felt safer banking at Horizon than anywhere else. Clara Evans led a compliance audit confirming that within 21 days, customer satisfaction ratings had climbed higher than any point in the past 5 years. But the twist no one expected came not from inside Horizon, but from outside. A memo from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau landed on Eleanor's desk marked urgent. The agency had reviewed Horizon's Fairbank rollout and suspended its planned federal audit, a rare move. Instead of penalties, they issued a commendation. Your institution, the letter read, has demonstrated a model for immediate response, measurable reform, and replicable equity systems. As of this date, Horizon Bank will serve as a national case study in financial dignity restoration. The headline broke that evening across major outlets, CEOs Stan Sparks' National Banking Reform. By the following week, 2 major competitor banks quietly requested access to Fairbank's training modules. Eleanor approved it with one condition: every institution that used it had to publish quarterly equity reports open to the public. Within days, banks from California to Maine began calling. Some tried to purchase the program. Eleanor refused. It's not for sale, she told a board of shareholders. Dignity isn't a product. It's a promise. In her office, now lined with letters from clients she'd never met, Eleanor paused one evening at sunset. The same woman who was told 3 weeks ago that she didn't belong, who was humiliated by her own staff, who stood alone in a room full of assumptions, had now shifted the language of banking itself. But to Eleanor, the biggest win wasn't in headlines or reports. It was in the quiet voice of a new teller, a young Latina woman from the South Side who stopped her after orientation and said, "My aunt saw what you did. She said maybe this place could finally be for people like us." Eleanor smiled. Then we're just getting started. The bank didn't just survive. It transformed. And for the first time in decades, the system had to catch up to the people, not the other way around. The months that followed the reckoning at Horizon Bank saw the quiet but unmistakable rearranging of lives. Margaret Klein, once known among peers as the gatekeeper, left the banking world entirely. At first, she disappeared, vanished from LinkedIn, changed her number, declined interview requests. But Eleanor had offered a choice, and to her surprise, Margaret eventually took it. 3 months after her dismissal, a letter arrived at Horizon's headquarters, not addressed to HR, not to legal, but to Eleanor personally. In it, Margaret expressed something that wasn't quite apology and wasn't quite justification. It was accountability. I thought protecting Horizon meant guarding it from what I didn't understand. Now I see the truth that I was protecting my own fear and nothing else. Enclosed with the letter was a photo of Margaret standing before a classroom of adult learners at a community financial literacy center on the South Side. She was volunteering twice a week. She didn't ask for her job back. She didn't need to. Eleanor smiled as she placed the photo on a side shelf in her office, not as a trophy, but as proof that people can change if the mirror is honest enough. Kenneth Doyle and Tara Leeds completed the full Fairbank retraining cycle. Their return wasn't flashy or ceremonial. There were no welcome back cakes or HR memos, just desks reassigned and new duties logged. Kenneth spent his first month after reinstatement auditing every customer service complaint filed in the last 5 years, compiling a report that shocked even Eleanor. He didn't speak much during those weeks. When he finally did, he asked to be transferred to training design. He wanted to help others see what he hadn't. Tara, once brash and immovable, led 3 internal workshops on bias recovery. She didn't use slides or polished speeches. Instead, she started each session with the same sentence. "Here's what I missed when I thought I knew everything." She became a mentor for new tellers from underserved communities. Not because it was required, because she knew what it meant now. As for Preston Ward, his name vanished from the lobby plaque. His VIP status was erased from every branch. Rumor had it he tried to open a new account at a private institution downtown and was quietly turned away. His behavior, once tolerated as eccentric elitism, had become a liability in a changing industry. The world had seen him sneer at a woman he thought beneath him, only to realize she was the very foundation beneath his privilege. Eleanor never spoke his name again. She didn't need to. The silence said enough. Horizon Bank thrived, not only in profit but in purpose. Customer trust rebounded, employee morale soared, and quarterly equity audits became an industry standard. Clara Evans was promoted to Chief Compliance Officer, ensuring the reforms weren't just maintained but sharpened. Nina Patel was honored at a national HR summit for her role in emergency accountability. Marcus Tate, the quiet protector, retired 6 months later, not with a party, but with a note from Eleanor: "Justice needs witnesses. Thank you for being one." And Eleanor, she remained CEO, not out of obligation but because something had shifted not just in the bank, but in her. Where once she'd fought quietly, strategically, now she led with unflinching clarity. She visited every branch over the next 6 months, sitting not in boardrooms, but in teller break rooms, listening to what her people feared, what they hoped for. She rewrote the bank's client charter. She restructured promotion systems to reward empathy and accountability, not just numbers. And she kept one framed document behind her desk, the original fraud report filed against her that day in the lobby, not as bitterness, as proof. That change always costs something, and that it's always worth paying. One spring morning, she stood before a group of new hires in a sunlit atrium in Atlanta. Most were in their 20s. Some had never heard the full story. She told it plainly without dramatics. At the end, one young woman raised her hand and asked, "But weren't you furious? Like really furious?" Eleanor smiled. "I was," she said, "but I was also focused. Because justice is loudest when it's quiet, when it's not shouted but built. And now you're part of that. So now to you who followed this story to the end, consider this your invitation. Look around. Where have you seen injustice brushed off, disguised as policy or protocol? Where have you watched someone shrink under the weight of someone else's assumptions? Speak. Advocate. Ask questions. The story of dignity doesn't end in a bank lobby or a boardroom. It lives in your voice, in your neighborhood, in your next decision. Because when one woman stood still and spoke truth to the system that tried to erase her, she didn't just fix a policy, she lit a path. And tomorrow's path still needs walking.